I found that very, very useful in the village of Harlem when I realized that my constituency was elected officials. It was my neighbors, many of whom knew the school far better than I did. I did have an advantage, though, because I had grown up with a mother who considered the world, her neighborhood, and therefore had attended a number of public programs at the Harlem School of the Arts as a child, and really had a sense of the organization, but not any concept of the impact that it had had on the lives of so many. When I was dispatched to West Africa, it was with one sheet of paper in hand, my budget, which had 5 lines, and my list of priority areas of focus, which were 6 lines in total. They were in line, though, with the funding priorities of the 50 other foundations in the Soros network. And I remember asking whose bright idea it was to establish a regional foundation with such an unprecedented number of countries. I was told that I could eliminate some of them if I believed that my $10 million budget was insufficient to achieve the desired impact. And I thought, great, eliminate countries before I land in the region. That'll go over like the balloon boy and land me on... And knowing journalists, it'll land me on the BBC trying to justify myself before I even started working. I chose to deal with what I had, packed out, relocated my family, and got to work. I was fortunate to have spent a significant amount of time in the region and had a fairly deep knowledge of the state of a number of those countries that fell into my geographic mandate. However, there were countries where I was just generally aware about the in-country situation, but I had no firsthand knowledge of them, and neither did anyone else. My strategy was to immediately work with staff to prioritize certain countries based on our ability to move in quickly and work with our partners to get programs up and running, identify regional initiatives that would engage partners in countries where our work was not as deep, but it was also possible to ramp up rapidly, and support a critical mass of non-governmental organizations working on the same issues throughout the region simultaneously. But then there was category 3, the countries where we had extremely limited areas for engagement or none at all, and certainly no knowledge to speak of what the realities were on the ground. This brings me to my first extreme site visit. Guinea-Bissau was a borderline failed state, still is, off and on, where narco-traffickers and Russian, Eastern European, and Indian mafias ruled. It's a place that the wanted go to hide. It's a country with vast resources. It's also the country that produces most of the cashews that you eat in this country. But they are controlled by the Indian corporations and treated in India and then exported as Indian cashews to this country. The conditions for those who produce them are abysmal. And because the country regularly alternated between military dictatorship and limited civilian government, apart from a small UNICEF and World Bank presence, which was really a few individuals, and the occasionally externally funded project, there were no in-country donors and few identifiable projects that one could reference for guidance. I knew that we really, as the type of donors that we were, needed to do some work in this country. I contacted the bravest woman I knew at the time, a Nicaraguan-American investigative journalist, Ana Arana, and invited her to work with me to figure out what we could possibly accomplish in Guinea-Bissau. After doing her research, which basically involved finding out who the army generals were and how to best approach them, Ana flew over from the States, and together we spent 2 weeks in the country with the goal to figure out who in the government made the decisions and whether individuals or groups existed that we could work with. We had learned before we left that there was a community radio station based on Bijagos Island, which was the largest of 88 islands in the Bijagos archipelago, and both Ana and I knew that this was the site visit. The day before we planned to go on the site visit, we put together our team, our in-country bodyguard and driver, a pastor who worked in Bijagos, and a journalist who was familiar with the radio station. There was no way to communicate with the station and its staff before we traveled to visit, so we headed to the pier and decided to rent one of the few functioning speedboats in the city. We confirmed our departure time, which was dawn the next morning. At 5:30 a.m., when we arrived at the pier, we learned that 2 Spanish drug traffickers had paid a higher price and had commandeered our speedboat moments earlier. Eventually, the 5 of us and 2 young boys squeezed into a tiny rubber dinghy with an outboard motor and headed onto the high seas for a 2-hour trip that challenged our bodies and our sanity. It wasn't until we could no longer see the shore and we had no view of our destination that we were informed about the shark-infested waters that we were in, and the Danish tourists who disappeared a few months earlier in those waters in the same type of boat. I had a 4-year-old at home and a husband that I had never told the story until today when he read my speech. So, we did finally reach Bijagos Island. We did meet the founder and operator of the community radio station, who was the lifeline for every citizen living on those 88 islands. And when we left, we knew that we had been a part of something so singularly special and important that we knew exactly what we needed to achieve with the media, with the fisher women's cooperatives, with the workers on the cashew plantations, with educators in a country where school is normally in session an average of a few months a year because there was no money to pay teachers, and some government agencies for that good old government buy-in. I use this example of the lengths to which we as donors must go to obtain information about our grantees and the conditions within which they are operating, because this understanding can be the most critical factor in the success or failure of the programs that we support. In West Africa, my overarching goal was to incorporate clarity, relevance, and the input of our various constituencies into our work, because I understood that we as foundation staff could never, as educated, intelligent, and empathetic as we may be, truly understand the lives of our constituents, both grantees and the citizens we served, or how to best support them in transforming their communities without their input into our decision-making processes. Our message to them was also dependent upon our ability to articulate an institutional mission with clarity and, most importantly, with honesty, especially as a new donor in the region, because our constituency was vastly diverse in its historical, economic, social, ethnic, and cultural experiences. We armed with this context, though, only then could we engage in the triage process of identifying our partners and target constituencies in an environment where societal, political, and economic change was the norm, and with a finite budget. This really speaks to the conditions that we face as community-based arts organizations and that you face today as funders. This is a triage situation, and information is the key to being able to make those decisions in real time and make them in honor of the dignity of those who are out there doing the work that we care for so much.